So, following on from my poor excuse for humour in the last episode, some of you may have guessed where this episode is set. Join us as we explore St. Fagans Castle. My partner and I decided to go for a little jaunt before we spent the weekend attacking the floor in our living room, where it turns out that the cowboy builders who installed the original carpet decided it would be acceptable to leave the underlay down after a previous owner, for want of a better word, clocked out and then leaked into it. I'm sure you can agree, delightful. Anyhow, enough of that. It can't be helped, and besides, we have a nice new floor. So, St. Fagans. St. Fagans is the Welsh History Museum, where historic buildings that are at risk of being demolished or destroyed are taken down brick by brick and rebuilt within the grounds. This in turn brings its own stories of confused ghosts, an old lady who doesn't like people being in her house, and a little boy who is seen throwing objects down the stairs. And on the occasion that we went down there, I managed to catch a glimpse of the elusive camera dodger for you. According to staff there, they are confused because of the relocation of their house. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd be pretty confused if I went to sleep one night and my house ended up somewhere else. Not that I have any intention of dying in my sleep, not unless my partner decides that she's had enough of me. However, back to the story. One area of the museum has been occupied since 1098. St. Fagans Castle began its life as a defensive structure shortly after the Norman conquest. The site remained a stronghold and grew in strength over time. In the 12th century, the first castle was officially constructed on the site, the walls of which still exist today. But the main keep of the castle, transformed in 1560 by Dr. John Gibbon, who I could not find a picture of, or Sir William Herbert, the first Earl of Pembroke. Now, old Herbie has made a brief cameo on my channel before, since he constructed the Baron's Court. You can watch that video in the top right now. The building remained a defensive structure for many years, including throughout the Civil War. This is an important point when I stop flapping my lips and get into the stories. The property and the land was donated to the National Museum of Wales in 1946 by the Earl of Plymouth. It was remodeled to resemble how the property looked in the 1800s. I went on a ghost walk to St. Fagans Castle many years back and heard many good stories. I had an unnerving experience of my own though, which I'll get into later on. The gardens of the castle are absolutely stunning. I would recommend seeing them. But at night, there is something ever so slightly more sinister about them. On the 8th of May, 1648, a large battle was waged within the village of St. Fagans. Despite the Civil War largely coming to an end, disputes about pay and loyalties brought tensions to breaking point for a second time, and war erupted again. In no other area of Wales was the fighting more ferocious than the Battle of St. Fagans. 11,000 troops fought, with over 300 royalist soldiers killed and 3,000 captured. But enough about history, you want stories. On certain nights of the year, a lone, dishevelled soldier can be seen staggering around the pond before vanishing. As the story was told to us, Mother Nature decided to add a touch of theatrics by sending a flash of lightning arcing across the sky. We were in for a good night. We were led away from the ponds and up through the gardens before entering into the main doors. All the while, lightning flashed and thunder rolled in the distance. Once inside, we entered into the main sitting room of the house, a beautiful wood-panelled room that had a series of chairs set out for us, facing the doorway to the main staircase. Once we were seated and facing him, he then proceeded to tell us about the various figures who have occupied the house. From here, he told us that on one of the more recent tours that he'd run, as he spoke of the previous owners, a black shadow travelled down the staircase behind him, floated through the door, and passed through the closed door to the small study. He was only alerted when the tourist screamed and asked to leave. We were then led to the back corridor. This corridor has one or two stories of its own. On several occasions, staff have opened up in the morning to find the old servants' bells chiming. When they had rounded the corner, they had been met with the sight of an empty hallway with the faint sound of jingling as the bells came to a rest. Similarly, when we were recently at the property, a member of staff informed me of two stories that occurred in both of these areas. The first was in the middle of the day. This staff member was approached by a member of the public. She was quite shaken up and approached him tentatively. She told him that she had begun to walk up the stairs when she suddenly had the sensation that someone was staring at her. As she looked up, she froze at the sight of a ghostly woman in a flowing white dress floating down the staircase towards her before vanishing into thin air. All he could say was, "You've had a privilege to see her." The woman left and hasn't been back since. Another morning, two colleagues of his had informed him that they had been opening up when they heard the sound of singing echoing around the corridors. They traced the sound to a storeroom just off the servants' corridor. They were unnerved by this since the room was always kept locked and the staff had the keys. They pulled out their set of keys, found the correct one, and turned it in the lock. As the door opened, the singing stopped abruptly. They searched the room and the smaller room that was inside, but found no trace of the mysterious singer. They believed that the person singing could have been the spirit of Molly. Apparently, Molly was a servant who worked at the premises during the 1800s. She was known to sing constantly while she worked. I've not been able to find any records of anyone by the name of Molly, but she may be one of the servants in the picture shown. Now, the house is currently suffering severe water damage to the upstairs rooms, which the staff are desperately trying to repair, including plans to remove the entire roof to fix the present damage. When I went on the tour, however, the walls and ceiling were intact, as you can see in the picture on the screen now. We had travelled up the narrow servant staircase onto the second floor. This is where our tour guide told us several more ghost stories, which I cannot remember, before telling us to explore the rooms, but to do so in silence, as you never know what you might hear. As it turns out, we heard more than we bargained for. A small group of us had broken off and entered into one of the rooms. This room is shown in the photo that you can see, but is sadly out of action due to the water damage. I was at the back of the room, and there were a group of Welsh women from the valleys in front of me. Now, I don't tend to deal in generalities, but in this case, it helps to understand the scene. The stereotypical Valleys girl tends to have more fake tan than David Dickinson, have a permanent duck face expression, and could peel paint off a wall at 100 paces with just the sound of their voices alone. And leading up to the tour, they had been incredibly loud. I'm sure this is one of the reasons why I'm partially deaf. However, credit where credit is due. Once the tour started, they were as good as gold. As I was saying, they were in front of me in the room, and we were all listening intently for any sound. Then we heard it. A sound of thunder, but not coming from the weather which had long since passed. This came from inside the room itself. They screamed and clutched each other. I smiled and took great pleasure in apologizing to them, and explained that I hadn't had any food yet and was hungry. We laughed and I turned to walk out of the room. As I reached the door, I froze with the horrible feeling that someone was watching me from the servants' staircase. I turned, but could only see blackness. At that point I jumped, because from the empty blackness came the sound of a floorboard creaking, as though someone was standing there watching me from the darkness. As I stood watching in terror, an almighty bell sounded from the grandfather clock next to the stairwell, causing another round of screams. There was no reason for the clock to chime, since it hadn't struck the hour, and no one was near it. Safe to say, I was thankful that this was the last experience of the night, before I scarpered off home, slightly more nervous and ever so slightly more damp. Anyway, that's all from us here at Dark Entertainment. We hope that you've enjoyed the episode, and if so, leave us a comment, share, or drop us a like. We're on Facebook and X, and if you have any stories you wish for us to tell, or any place that you'd like for us to explore, you can contact me at dark_entertainment@outlook.com. I'll be talking through the ghost stories of Llandaff in Llandaff itself on the 20th of October. I hope to see some of you there. And remember, stay dark, stay creepy, and always laugh. Ta-ta!